You've known them for 11 days. You've replayed a handful of their texts more times than you'd comfortably admit out loud. You caught yourself doing the mental math on whether your schedules could actually work long term. And underneath all of it, somewhere quiet, there's a voice that's been trying to say something. The same voice that said it last time, that this might be moving a little fast, but you can't stop it. You don't even particularly want to, because this feeling, this specific electric everything finally makes sense feeling, is one of the most extraordinary things a human brain is capable of producing. So you lean in, and in the very back of your mind, you are quietly terrified you're doing it again. People who fall in love quickly are almost never who everyone assumes they are. They are not naive, they are not reckless, they are not teenagers who've never been hurt. In fact, some of the people who fall the fastest are the ones who've been hurt the most. Thoughtful, deeply self-aware people who can watch the entire pattern unfold in real time, name it while it's happening, and still cannot pull the brakes. And I want to say clearly before we go any further, that is not a personal failing. There is something very specific happening in the brain and in the history behind the brain. And once you actually understand it, this trait looks entirely different from the outside, neurologically. When you fall in love, your brain does not behave the way most people imagine it does. Neuroscientist Helen Fisher spent decades scanning the brains of people who described themselves as deeply, intensely in love. And what she found was striking. The regions that lit up weren't the emotional processing centers. They were the reward centers. The same areas activated by cocaine, by gambling, by any experience the brain has flagged as a potential source of something extraordinary. The primary driver is dopamine, not a feeling, a neurochemical. And dopamine doesn't operate on timelines. It doesn't say, you've only known this person 11 days. Perhaps slow down. It says more, more, more. And it says it from the very first moment something promising appears. There's also a concept that gives this specific experience its own name. In 1979, psychologist Dorothy Tennov published research identifying what she called limerence, an involuntary obsessive state of romantic fixation characterized by intrusive thinking, a heightened sensitivity to the other person's smallest responses, and an almost physical longing for them to feel what you feel. It's not love in the full sense. It's the brain's version of love before it has enough information. So it does what the brain always does when it wants to complete a picture it doesn't have yet. It fills the gaps with projection, with possibility, with the very best version of who this person could be. And it does this not because you're foolish, but because your brain is extraordinarily efficient at constructing a complete picture from incomplete data. That's not a design flaw. It's actually one of the brain's more impressive capabilities, just not always a convenient one. Here's where it gets a little more uncomfortable, because this part is more personal than most people are ready to hear. Not everyone falls this fast. And the question worth sitting with isn't just why the brain does this at all, it's why it does it with such urgency for certain people and not others. People who fall in love quickly very often share something underneath the pattern, a history in which love was unpredictable, not cold, not absent, unpredictable, where connection felt like something that appeared and disappeared without explanation. And you learned, long before you had the words for it, that you had to meet it when it came, because waiting to see if it would last was a risk you'd already learned to stop taking. That might have looked like a parent who was warm and present sometimes, and completely unreachable others. A home where affection came and went without any clear reason, and where you quietly concluded that love has a window, and the window doesn't stay open long. That understanding, absorbed at 4 or 5 or 7 years old, doesn't disappear when you grow up. It comes with you. It sits in every new relationship at week 2 when everything feels possible, and the whole nervous system is saying, this, hold on to this, now, before it goes. Psychologist John Bowlby spent years studying exactly this. How early caregiving relationships shape the way people pursue and experience connection in adulthood. What the research consistently found is that children who experience inconsistent warmth, tend to develop what's now called anxious attachment, an underlying, often unconscious sense that closeness is temporary, that people eventually leave. And that urgency, once it's been wired in, doesn't get switched off just because the childhood is over. And here is the part that I think is actually the most useful thing in this entire video, even though it's the hardest to hear. When you fall in love in the first few weeks, you are not falling in love with a person. You are falling in love with a projection, a version of them you've assembled from what they've shown you, what they've told you, and a very significant amount of what you've quietly filled in yourself. The philosopher Alain de Botton describes it as knowing someone before you actually know them. The way we complete the portrait in our heads with who we need them to be, rather than waiting for who they actually are to emerge over time. This isn't stupidity, it's imagination. But it does mean the crash, when it comes, isn't only about the relationship ending. It's about losing a future you had already built in your mind, in detail, before it had the chance to become real. And that is a very specific grief that most people cannot explain to anyone around them. How do you mourn something that technically hadn't happened yet? You just do. You mourn it quietly, and it feels disproportionate from the outside, and everyone around you wonders why you're this affected by someone you only knew for 2 months. What they don't understand is that you weren't grieving 2 months. You were grieving years. So here is what I actually want you to take from this. Falling in love quickly is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is not proof that you're too much, too fast, or too intense for people to handle. It is the meeting point of a brain wired for reward and a history that taught you not to wait. Those are two very human things happening simultaneously. What changes when you understand the mechanism is not the feeling. The feeling stays. What changes is the relationship you have with the feeling, the ability to hold it and be fully in it without completely surrendering yourself to a story you've written alone. The ability to be interested in the actual person, catching up to the version of them you've already fallen for, rather than the other way around. Falling fast means you feel things deeply. It means something in you still opens toward people without full protection, even after the times that cost you. That's not a weakness. That's one of the harder things to maintain in a life that keeps teaching you to be careful. The work isn't to stop falling, it's to stay curious about who's actually there while you do. If this landed somewhere real, not just as an interesting idea, but in that quieter place where you actually recognize something, then you're probably someone who thinks hard about why you are the way you are, which means you'll find a lot more to sit with in the videos on screen now. They cover the patterns underneath patterns, the things people feel that have explanations nobody ever gave them. Subscribe if you want to keep going. I'll see you in the next one.